A respected teacher's career takes an unexpected turn when a routine test correction spirals into a controversy fueled by privilege and power. After downgrading a top student's score due to undeniable errors, the teacher finds herself accused of bias, suspended without warning, and thrust into the center of a community divided by race and influence. What begins as a simple act of upholding academic integrity unravels a web of systemic injustice, deceit, and courage. In the end, however, justice was served. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you are watching from and subscribe to see more similar true-life stories. In the middle of grading a stack of tests was Miss Ayanna Brooks. A black woman in a predominantly white institution, she's known for her unwavering dedication to her students, her progressive teaching methods, and the quiet way she challenges the status quo. But none of that could prepare her for the storm that was about to break, whose eyes catch an error that's impossible to ignore, a mistake that goes unnoticed by everyone else but her sharp eye. It's a small mistake in one of the top students' answers, a mistake that has gone uncorrected in previous assessments. Her pen moves instinctively, drawing a red line beneath the incorrect answer and marking the grade accordingly. It's the right thing to do, or so she believes. The student in question is Brandon Sullivan, a bright, well-liked young man with a track record of perfect grades. His family has influence in the community and in the school. His mother, Mrs. Sullivan, has long held sway over the administration, a silent but powerful force that ensures her son always gets the attention he deserves. Brandon, the golden boy, doesn't seem to mind his mother's grip on things. He's content to glide through life with the privilege of being untouchable. But now, for the first time, he's been touched. That red pen, the symbol of fairness in a system that often turns a blind eye, has torn through his flawless record. The grade he receives is lower than he expects, and though it's justified by the errors on his paper, he can't accept it. Word spreads quickly. Ms. Brooks has marked down Brandon. The whispers grow louder, reaching the ears of the very people who shouldn't have to listen. People who, for the first time, feel that their son's future might be at risk. Within hours, Mrs. Sullivan marches into the principal's office, her fury simmering beneath the surface. She demands an immediate explanation, her voice unwavering as she accuses Ms. Brooks of targeting her son simply because of her race. The accusation is powerful, and it's enough to cause doubt in the minds of the school board members. Within a matter of days, Ms. Brooks is suspended, pending a full investigation. The reason? Bias. The school is divided. On one side, there are those who feel that Ms. Brooks has been unfairly treated, but they are few and far between. On the other side, there are whispers of a teacher who has gone too far, who has let her own prejudices shape the classroom in a way that could ruin a promising student's future. As the news spreads, the weight of it settles on Ayanna's shoulders. She knows she did the right thing, but it doesn't seem to matter. All that remains is the hollow echo of her footsteps as she walks through the empty halls, suspended, uncertain, and isolated. But the story doesn't end here. As Ms. Brooks retreats to her home, wondering if this is the end of her career, a group of students, led by Brandon's closest friend, begins to take action. They dig deeper into the incident, uncovering not just the truth about Brandon's test, but the layers of privilege and manipulation that have long gone unnoticed. Their investigation will lead them to a discovery so explosive, it will not only change the course of Ms. Brooks' fate, but the future of the school itself. The days following Miss Brooks' suspension are long, fraught with sleepless nights and anxious thoughts. Her phone buzzes with messages, some from supportive colleagues, others from students who feel betrayed by the system. But as the days drag on, something unexpected happens. A few students, those who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, begin to gather in secret. They're not content with the story being spun by the school board, nor with the media portrayal of their teacher as some rogue educator who let her emotions cloud her judgment. They know there's more to this than a single grade. Among them is Lucy Carter, a student who had always admired Ms. Brooks from afar. Lucy, a white student who had once been part of Brandon's inner circle, had always been skeptical of the privileges afforded to her friends, especially Brandon. As she watches her former classmate's mother manipulate the narrative, Something clicks. She begins to question everything she thought she knew about the school, her peers, and the way power works in this community. It starts with small things. Lucy overhears a conversation in the hallway between two faculty members who dismiss Ms. Brooks' suspension as nothing more than a political move. One mentions how Mrs. Sullivan had been involved in a similar situation years ago, but the details are vague. Curiosity piqued, Lucy digs deeper, speaking to other students, looking for whispers of truths long buried. The more she uncovers, the more she becomes convinced that this isn't just about one teacher or one test. It's about a larger system that has been stacked in favor of certain people for far too long. The corruption runs deeper than she imagined, and she can no longer sit back and watch. She gathers a small group of students who are equally disillusioned with the way the school is handling the situation. Together, they begin to piece together the puzzle. They talk to other teachers who have had their careers subtly undermined by the Sullivan family's influence. They speak with students who have been too afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation. Slowly, they discover a pattern. Brandon Sullivan isn't the first student to be given preferential treatment, nor is he the first student whose errors were ignored in favor of maintaining a spotless record. Ms. Brooks' correction wasn't an isolated incident. It was an anomaly in a system built on favoritism. The final piece of the puzzle falls into place when Lucy tracks down a recording. A quiet conversation between Brandon and his best friend reveals a disturbing truth. Brandon's mother had urged him to lie about the test correction, to claim that it was racially motivated in order to get his teacher suspended. The admission is captured on Lucy's phone, clear and damning. Armed with this evidence, the group of students prepares for the next move. They know they have to act quickly. The school board is set to meet in 2 days to finalize Ms. Brooks' suspension. If they wait too long, it'll be too late. The day of the hearing arrives, and the atmosphere at the school is thick with tension. A crowd gathers outside the school board's meeting room, split between those who support Ms. Brooks and those who stand behind the Sullivan family. Lucy and her group stand in the back, hearts pounding as they prepare to present their evidence. The room is filled with murmurs, some of support, others of condemnation. When Ms. Brooks walks in, her head held high despite everything, the room goes silent. She is the image of quiet dignity, yet beneath the calm exterior, the storm rages. The hearing begins, and the board members waste no time in addressing the allegations against Ms. Brooks. They speak of fairness, of academic integrity, but it's clear from their tone that they have already made up their minds. Mrs. Sullivan stands at the front, her voice unwavering as she accuses Ms. Brooks of bias and ruining her son's future. The room is tense as the board begins to deliberate. Just as the meeting seems to be drawing to a close, Lucy stands up, her voice cutting through the silence. She's never spoken in a meeting like this before, but now she has no choice. "I have something to say," she declares, stepping forward. The eyes of the room shift toward her, and for a moment, everything stops. With trembling hands, Lucy plays the recording for everyone to hear. The room goes still, and then a ripple of shock spreads across the audience as Brandon's voice echoes through the room, admitting the lies his mother had encouraged. The truth is undeniable. Mrs. Sullivan's influence, her manipulations, and her attempt to ruin Miss Brooks' career are all laid bare for everyone to see. There's a moment of stunned silence before chaos erupts. The school board members exchange glances, the weight of their decisions now heavy with the knowledge that they cannot ignore the truth. Brandon, his face flushed with shame, stands up and stumbles through an apology to Ms. Brooks. The board, now forced to reckon with the evidence, quickly reverses its stance. Ms. Brooks' suspension is lifted, and she is reinstated with an apology from the school. Mrs. Sullivan's influence begins to unravel as the community begins to see the full extent of her manipulation. But even as the crowd disperses and the students rally around their teacher, the story doesn't end there. The investigation into Mrs. Sullivan's past actions begins, revealing a long history of favoritism and coercion that has shaped the school's culture. The entire community is forced to confront the truth about the power dynamics that have long been at play. The panel dug deep into the school's records, uncovering a troubling pattern. Mrs. Sullivan, it turned out, had used her influence not just to protect her son, but also to manipulate outcomes for others. Teachers who didn't cooperate found their evaluations downgraded or their contracts mysteriously terminated. In some cases, students competing with Brandon for top honors mysteriously dropped in rank due to errors in their assessments. One such case involved a former teacher, Mr. Bennett, who had quietly resigned years earlier after Mrs. Sullivan accused him of unfairly grading Brandon's work. The panel tracked him down. Over a cup of coffee in his modest home, he revealed the truth. "I wasn't going to fail Brandon, but I wasn't going to pass him on false merits either," Bennett explained, his voice laced with bitterness. "She threatened to ruin me, and she did. The administration never stood up for me. They let her run the place like her personal kingdom." These revelations made their way to the public, sparking outrage. Parents who had long suspected favoritism finally had the courage to speak out. The Sullivan name, once synonymous with privilege and prestige, became a symbol of corruption. Back at school, Brandon faced his own fallout. Once the golden boy, he was now a pariah. His classmates, including some of his closest friends, turned their backs on him. "You lied about Ms. Brooks," Lucy confronted him one afternoon in the cafeteria. Her voice was firm, though tinged with disappointment. "Do you even realize what you've done? You almost destroyed her career, Brandon. For what, a grade?" Brandon's face flushed as he tried to respond. "I didn't think it would go this far," he mumbled. "I thought my mom would handle it like she always does. I never wanted." "You never wanted to take responsibility," Lucy cut him off. "Well, now you have to." The weight of his actions began to sink in. Brandon, realizing the extent of his mother's manipulation, started to push back against her control. At home, tensions erupted. "You've ruined everything, Brandon," Mrs. Sullivan yelled one evening, slamming her fist on the dining table. "Do you know how much I've done to make sure you succeed? All the sacrifices I've made for you?" "Sacrifices?" Brandon shot back, his voice rising for the first time in years. "You mean lies and manipulation? You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself, to keep up your perfect image. I'm done being your puppet." The confrontation marked a turning point. Brandon, now under scrutiny, voluntarily confessed to his role in the scandal and issued a public apology to Ms. Brooks. His admission, though late, softened some of the backlash against him. As for Mrs. Sullivan, the consequences were far more severe. The investigation found clear evidence of her interference in school affairs, leading to her being barred from all school board activities and community committees. Her social standing crumbled, and she faced multiple lawsuits from former teachers who had lost their jobs due to her actions. The school, under new leadership, began implementing reforms. Policies were put in place to ensure greater transparency in grading, and diversity training became mandatory for all staff. Most importantly, the culture of silence and favoritism that had defined the institution began to dissolve. Ms. Brooks, while grateful for her reinstatement, didn't stop there. She became a prominent advocate for educational equity, speaking at conferences and working with local organizations to support teachers and students in underserved communities. One day, Brandon approached her after class, looking nervous but determined. "Miss Brooks, I don't expect you to forgive me," he began, his voice quiet, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. I've started volunteering at the Literacy Center downtown. It's not much, but it's a start." Miss Brooks studied him for a moment before responding. "Growth is a journey, Brandon. The fact that you've started is what matters. Keep going." In the end, the scandal that nearly destroyed one teacher's career became a catalyst for change, forcing a school and its community to confront its flaws. Ms. Brooks emerged stronger. Brandon found a path to redemption, and the once unshakable Sullivan empire lay in ruins. Justice, though delayed, had finally prevailed.